speak through it. In any case, I hope you can hear me and understand what I'm saying. Um, it is, as many of you know, our pleasure to present a series of book talks over the course of the year of significant books of Jewish interest, and this is certainly central to that category. We are just thrilled to have two outstanding scholars and a work that is of great interest to many of us: Polish Jewish culture beyond the capital, centering the periphery. You have created, Helena, did you create this PowerPoint? You've really done my work for me. I appreciate it very much. I can speak less as a result. Um, I just want to say that uh, this is so important for us to bear in mind and to recover when we hear so frequently about the difficulties and pains of Jewish life in Poland before the Second World War and beyond, of course. Um, we often don't recall enough the complexity of that life, the richness of that life, the ways that Jews lived and participated in the society in a way that was mutually fructifying, that Jews learned from their neighbors and vice versa. And it is scholars like yourselves who have really brought this back to our attention. And it's a very, very important attention. So I will stop beleaguering you with the painful sounds of my voice and turn it over to you, Helena.
Thank you, David, and thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to share this book with our guests. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time from your busy day to join us here. The PowerPoint is a co-creation, like everything about this book. Nancy and I really worked arm in arm on every aspect of this book and the project that led to this book. You will learn about it a little bit more. This is one of those books that you can judge by its cover. I hope you will enjoy this cover as much as we did. We truly love this image, but it is beyond its aesthetic beauty. We chose this image because it carries meaning central to the concept of this book. We dedicated the book to the Jewish artists, writers, and poets, musicians, theater and cabaret performers, architects, filmmakers, and moviegoers, patrons of the arts, teachers and journalists, and communal and youth movement activists of Polish lands. We stand on your shoulders. That list was a result of the book. As we were working on the book, as we were getting to know this topic, we became increasingly more aware in what way Jewish artists and Jewish audiences participated in various kinds of cultural production, various aspects of cultural production. We worked on a period starting in the 19th century, but much of the work actually ended up focusing on the interwar period, which is particularly fascinating. So this is where the book cover came from. It actually came from the cover of sheet music for a tango that was incredibly popular in the interwar period. Rebecca was premiered in the CI theater. It was a cabaret, but kind of a cabaret with highbrow aspirations in the kind of in the sort of topics addressed and humor and the levels of artistry. In 1932, and it became an instant hit. There are performances, recorded performances of the song by many artists, and many of them Jewish artists. The cover itself was designed by Leon Heifetz, whose work came to us mostly in the form of graphic art. utilitarian art. And for example, his book covers, there are other book covers that survived, are stunning. Zygmunt Białostocki was a composer, one of the most talented and successful composers of popular music in the interwar period, but also the music director in numerous theaters in Łódź and then in Warsaw. Andrzej Wlast was a lyricist that is credited with over 2,000 titles. And among those 2,000 songs, there are dozens that are still recognizable to today's audiences. And the artist who premiered the song was Dora Kalinovna, and Zofia Tern popularized it with a recording that came soon after. So here is a photograph from the actual performance, and you see here Dora Kalinovna. The recording that you will hear in a second is by Tern. The song itself embodies much of what interested us. This is the protagonist, the singer, a young Jewish woman from a small town. From this image, we know this took place in Kazimierz nad Wisłą. Kazimierz, you can recognize the buildings, the kind of characteristic architecture of the city. So she's singing about modern love. She is thinking about young men coming and taking her out of this traditional context that she's living in into a big city. He will arrive in a car, and she's hoping for a different life, inconsistent with the kind of context that is her everyday.
O mój wymarzony, o mój wytęskniony, nie wiesz o tym przecież ty, że w małym miasteczku za tobą ktoś wypłakał z oczu łzy, że biedna Rebeka w zamyśleniu czeka, aż przyjedziesz po nią sam i zabierzesz ją jako żonę swą hen do pałacu bram. Ten krzyk, ten gwałt, ten cud ja sobie wyobrażam, Boże mój. Na rynku cały lud, a na mnie błyszczy biały, weselny strój. O mój wymarzony, o mój wytęskniony, czy ktoś kocha cię jak ja? Lecz ja jestem biedna i to mój sen, co całe życie trwa.
So the song continues to be popular. I heard it throughout my entire youth in Poland, and there are new renditions of the song that appear just every few years. There is also what we found really interesting is this continued relevance of some of the artwork of the cultural products that we encountered. This is a perfect example of that. This is a performance, this is a recording from 2009. Alicja Grabowska and Hanajki, the district of Białystok that was inhabited by many of the poor Jews of the city. And she is offering the song in Esperanto, which is, of course, a language that was invented by Zamenhof in the late 19th century, another Jewish contribution to Polish and world culture.
Mia sospiro, mia admiro, tutte nei magazini che enci orbeto provia charm sencese, floras mio. Che povera Rebecca rememoro in vecas, kai attendas chi am so.
you notice how they were able to update the tango, and this is one of the things that happens, that many of these songs, as they are revived throughout the 20th and 21st century, they are given a kind of a new angle musically. So let me take you. Sorry. Let me tell you just a little bit more about the artist. So while Warsaw is a center of this cultural product that we are looking at, the song, it was written in Warsaw for artists who were active in Warsaw, for a cabaret that was in Warsaw. You will see immediately that that the artists come from various parts of what was at the time Poland. I was unable to find anything more about Heifetz, but I now know where to look. So if we talk again in a year, maybe I will know more. There are actually documents pertaining to him in the Warsaw Art Academy, where he studied, and his application from the 1920s is there. So maybe we'll learn something more about him. But you can see that they range from Białystok to Łódź and Rivne. And as you will see throughout this this presentation, but even more so in the book, there is a constant conversation between the center and periphery. And interestingly enough, it is not always at the center that is nourishing the periphery, but just the opposite. Here you have artists who came, achieved their artistic maturity elsewhere. Białostocki and Włast definitely worked in their hometowns before they moved to Warsaw, and they are bringing some of what they have learned in the periphery to Warsaw. I will pass it on to Nancy.
So I think somehow we have to unpin Helena and pin me or something.
We will do that right now. Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, you know, let me pin you first. There you go.
Okay,
Pin.
good. So just to give our listeners a sense of how this book came about, it was the best kind of serendipity. I had done a different edited volume on a different topic related to Ashkenazic Jewish culture, but on the Western lands, that is in Prussian lands, with a musicologist. I am not a musicologist, but I can tell you something about musicologists. They not only are extraordinary researchers, but they also are performers. So they up the requirements of being a scholar to the haptic and the audio. It's just amazing. And I was at a conference with my other colleague, Rebecca Cypis, doing a presentation on an earlier book where I met Professor Goldberg, and it was really was love at first sight, I have to say that. And we quickly realized that there wasn't enough attention to, as David Kramer suggested earlier, enough attention to the richness of Polish Jewish culture. Particularly Americans view much of Eastern Europe through a sepia, Cold War, Corbyn-tainted lens. And it's understandable, but like all narrative myths, it's not comprehensive, and it doesn't do justice to the richness of the past. And Helena herself, as you can hear from her accent and both her wonderful Polish, is herself a Łódźer. And she's from the great metropole of Łódź, and came here to study musicology and has gone on to have an extraordinary career in it. And I am not a Łódźer, I am a Great Necker, and but I have roots, like most Ashkenazic Jews, that go back to Poland. So one thing led to another, and it led to another because, and this is very important, since 1991, the fields of Eastern European and East European Jewish history, culture, literature, politics have undergone a kind of revolution. Illustrating what we all know, that politics infuses and affects intellectual life. And with the fall of the Soviet Union and the independence of many of its successor states, concomitant with at least initially afterwards, a search for democratization of both civil and academic life, many, many new intellectual possibilities grew. And this is my generation of scholars of Eastern Europe. My teachers, both in America and in Israel, were limited in many ways, not so much linguistically, but by the ability, source material. They could only work with archival material that they could get, or that was anthologized. Some of them couldn't visit the places to get to meet local librarians and archivists. All of that changed in 1991. I hate to say, what we also know is that things are changing once again, and changed actually with the shift to the right in the political governments in many of the former the nations that were formed after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And of course, everything I'm saying is terribly relevant to the crisis in Ukraine, which we now no longer seem to pay attention to. But trust me, Ukrainian scholars are now trying so hard to figure out how to maintain the kind of openness of intellectual discourse that they experienced in their own independence. But initially, there was great optimism and a great sense of flourishing of the study of the Polish-Jewish past. There was new source material that was available. People could get into local archives. There was the possibility of international exchange that hadn't existed before, except really underground, with scholars in German lands, Austria, the Baltics, North and South America, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, and of course, Israel. This is incredibly important. It meant that graduate students coming up in the ranks had a greater possibilities of being nurtured by a whole range of scholars. People could learn new languages in a different way. They could go to the Catholic University in Lublin. They could go to the Jagiellonian. They could go to Vilnius. They could study languages in situ with native speakers. They could do ethnographies with native informants. And this was all possible because of this changed political situation. Also, the shift generally and interest in all kinds of new methodologies, what we call the spatial turn, and interdisciplinary. That allowed me, sort of an old-fashioned textual historian, to work with musicologists, both Rebecca, but now most importantly, Helena Goldberg, who brings this incredible sense of artistry and musical culture to everything she does. So this was the generative moment in creating this book. And we did it with also our colleague Helena Goldberg, and with a group of people who were involved with Polish Jewish Studies, Polish Jewish Studies Workshop. And this meant we had a bias or a desire to take the fiddler off the roof, to stop focusing on a sort of nostalgic, commemorative thrust regarding the Städtlach of Eastern Europe, about which there's much to say. I mean, Helena mentioned Kazimierz nad Wisłą. Kazimierz is quote unquote a sort of shtetl, but it was more like, the way I compare it now for people, it was like Hudson, New York. If you know the Hudson River and you know the river towns that go north out of New York City, these artistic hubs, literary, visual, musical culture. That's what Kazimierz nad Wisłą was like. It was a summer redoubt for many artists in Warsaw. It was an incredibly creative and beautiful place. Movies were shot there, poetry was written there, students came to be there in the summer and then went back to Warsaw. So it's a peripheral shtetl, a market town, but hardly frozen in time or frozen in culture. We also, you see my hashtags here, we didn't want to focus on the Holben. And I want to be very clear here. It's not that we don't know what a catastrophe it was. It's not that we don't know what a caesura it created. Helena can tell you about her own personal childhood growing up, where there's something in the back and no one's talking about it architecturally, buildings repurposed, no one knows who are there. So let me be clear, the Horben, that is the destruction of European Jewry, was a fundamental break in many, many ways. But we need to look at what happened before. The interwar period only was designated the Winter War period on September 1st, 1939. Before that, it was the period after the Great War. And I know that sounds kind of semantic and pedantic in all the ways that we are, but it really means a lot. Both Helena and I have read documents from 1939, the summer of 1939, and Jews are still living full lives. They're going kayaking on the Wisła, they're planning summer trips, they're going to Sopot to go bathing, they're going to Zakopane to go hiking, They're going to musical performances. And of course, that changes on September 1st. But until then, they were living full Jewish lives. So that, and then of course, some of them were able to live full lives afterwards in different ways, either under Soviet or even under the Nazi occupation. But this was very much our instinct. We wanted to unsettle a historiography that was created in the Cold War, that was created by immigrants, again, with all due respect to memoir literature, and to rethink this idea of just commemoration of destruction. But why not Warsaw? Well, that was just because there were 6 major metropoles in interwar Poland, Łódź and Kraków and Lwów, but there were also smaller locales in which artistry was happening, either visual, musical, literary, etc. We just wanted to take some of the focus off Warsaw, even though you should note that Warsaw is the 2nd city in the world with the largest Jewish population. The first in the interwar period, of course, is New York. So Warsaw and New York are these two kind of poles of North American Ashkenazic Jewish culture and European Jewish culture, and they're very, very important. But let's remember, we have a global Yiddish press, and immigrants who have the Yiddish vernacular at their disposal are reading newspapers and hearing about musical productions and hearing about youth groups and hearing about opportunities to travel through the global Yiddish press. So we wanted to emphasize peripheries. Now, peripheries has a lot of meanings. On the one hand, it's spatial and landscape, that is venues or cities and places outside of Warsaw, but it was also other kinds of peripheries, meaning the encounter with non-Ashkenazic Jews, landscapes and rural culture, different forms of media, not just print media, not just politics. These were all the ways we thought about peripheries. Also gender, meaning making sure that the volume represented women's culture. So the periphery was both strategic in terms of, again, demography, but also sort of more meta, like what are the other kinds of ways we can think about Polish Jewish culture? So we put together, and we can look at the next slide, sort of 3 sections of a book. That's what you want to do. And of course, there's some flexibility here, but Tradition in Rebellion was our first, and we had 4 chapters, one on the Ararat Kleinkunst Theater, again, Łódź, very Łódź-centered, a wonderful chapter, and I'm going to speak a little more about some of them as we go further, but I wanted to give you a sense. Elchanan Vogler, an absolutely gorgeous pastoral poet from Vilna, a fantastic chapter, I have to say, on architecture, not what people think about. There were many, many Jewish architects and Jewish set designers involved with the most modern kinds of architectural experimentation. And this is about an incredible glass house designed by 2 Jewish architects and owned by a wealthy Jewish woman who had quite an interesting life. And then we looked at the Young Yiddish group. Again, language peripheries were very important to us, looking at the creativity in Polish and Russian and German and Yiddish, of course. The next the next section was performances and audiences, and we have a wonderful chapter on the Beis Yaakov theater productions. We think about Beis Yaakov, or as it would have pronounced, Beis Yankiv. That is the Orthodox school movement created by Sarah Schennerer, itself a modernist project to educate Jewish girls in Orthodoxy. But lo and behold, they weren't just, reading Techinas and women's Bibles. They were actually creating all of these fantastic theater productions. And Nomi Seidman did a fantastic job, as she always does, on finding great photographs. And I'll show you those, little girls acting like boys in Pulmspiels, etc. So that was, again, peripheral in the sense of these took place throughout various towns in Poland, and also girls transcending certain gender expectations in the context of a girls' school movement. So really makes us think about how flexible binaries can sometimes be. Magdalena Kozłowska, whoops, go back. I'll be quick, go back. Magdalena Kozłowska, the wonderful article on the encounter between Ashkenaz and Yemeni culture. Sylwia Jakubczyk-Ślęczka did a fantastic job excavating the repertories of musical societies in Lwów, showing their transformation during the interwar years. And Marcus Silber, again, back on this issue of Łódź and the centrality of Łódź and the creation of this industrial Lodromensch versus Warsaw and Kraków. Each of these cities have kind of an identity, and Łódź was known as was the Manchester of Poland. It was the industrial city. It was the red city in terms of left-wing politics, and created a certain kind of typos there, and that's the Lodromensch. And the last section was on spatial relations. Alicja Maslak-Maciejewska looked at an unbuilt monument, but unbuilt monuments tell you a lot about what people are thinking about, even if they don't get built. A monument honoring Kazimierz the Great. And Eugenio Prokop-Janiec did fantastic maps on looking at women's space in Kraków. Ella Bauer looked at the way movie theaters were used for all kinds of meeting spaces and public sphere activities in interwar Poland. And last, Daniel Heller talked about Jewish political life in the Eastern borderlands. So as you can see, there's something for everyone in this book. A friend of mine whom I said, you got to read my book. He said, Polish Jewish culture. And he looked at the TOC, table of contents. He said, you're right. There is something for everyone. And plus, as Helena will tell you, there's also a website with music. So let me just give you a few little slides to show you some of the contents of the book. This is from the Ararat performance in 1927-28, the article by Zervit Stern. And this is just to give you a sense of the kinds of ways scholars work. She found some newspaper publications of this very short-lived theater, Ararat, which was part of the Jewish avant-garde. We have a lot of ephemera. The great director, Moshe Broderson, didn't leave many papers, but Zervit was able to excavate and find things about it, including some of the scripts, etc., as well as some of the images here. The next slide. This is, again, the cover of Elchonen Vogler's Zwei Bereises beim Tracht, Two Birch Trees by the Highway, published in Vilna by the Pen Club of Vilna, that international pen club, poets, essays, and novelists. There was a Polish a chapter of the Pen Club, extremely important, actually, very important to me right now for various reasons. Vogler was a poet of the modernist group called Jung Vilna, but his work challenges the kind of bookish image of Vilna. Vilna is known for two things for most people: rabbinic culture, rightly rabbinic culture, but also secularism, thinking about the YIVO and the Yiddische Wissenschaftliche Institute and secular culture. But it's very much an urbanism, right? An urban rabbinic culture and urban secular culture. And what Justin Cami showed was that Vogler is interested in the pastoral, in nature, which was part and parcel of a movement known as Landkenntnis in Yiddish, meaning get to know your country. And this was a nationalist project, both for Poles, Christian Poles, and Jewish Poles. Remember, the Republic has just been reestablished after 123 years of occupation. And Christian Poles want to rediscover their lands to assert their national identity. And Jews want to get to know the land because they want to reassert Jewish belonging. And that is a whole topic unto itself. But Vogler is doing this through his poetic imagination. And his poems talk about, bumblebees and rivers, and imagines them in very different ways than you would expect, again, a poet of Jung Vilna and of urban life. Here is Irena Krzywicka. She is the woman who owned the glass house and commissioned it to be built, and by the architects by Maximilian Goldberg and Hippolyte Rutkowski. And the glass house destabilized the bourgeois ethic of this neighborhood, Podkowa-Leżna, and the nationalist bent of contemporary Polish architecture, because the muse was a cosmopolitan muse of modernism, not a Polish nationalist ethos. And here we have Broderson, again, in a very important publication, again, by Jung Yiddish, in Łódź, an avant-garde. This is hardly what you'd expect from Jewish visual culture. I think most of you, this is new for you. And here you have Broderson. You have lots of things going on here. You have the Shin, Kudfel Schwarz Shabbos. You have an M that could mean Manchester, it could be Polish miasto, the city. There are a lot of things going on here. You see a clock, you see a factory. So this is very much an assertion of Jewish modernism in this Yankel Adler's portrait of Moshe Broderson, who was the head of Ararat. Here you have Nomi Seidman's wonderful image of the girls in Beis Yaakov performing a play, and girls played boys. They challenged traditional gender roles, at least on the stage. And Sarah Schennerer herself was the director. So here she is creating a modernist school of Jewish orthodoxy for girls, but also writing and going to plays, which she was doing. So the idea that non-Jewish culture was off limits is a fiction of a projection of post-World War II siloed Orthodoxy and ultra-Orthodox, which was not characteristic for most Polish observant Jews. Good, so let's see, finally, almost finally, this is again Magdalena Kozłowska finding Bracha Tzfira, a Yemeni Jewish singer who toured throughout interwar Poland. She represented a peripheral or Jewish other to Ashkenazic Jews, extremely popular performer, creating a repertoire of non-Ashkenazic music for the consumption by Polish Jews. And this plays, this has to do with a larger topic of the way Poland itself didn't have colonies, but there was an engagement and interest in sort of otherness, both in Africa, the Middle East, and North Africa. And there were Polish colonial societies. People did travel to those places. And this is, again, Poland trying to assert itself as a big, important nation in the post-war years after the destruction of its imperial occupation. And you can see that she performed in Grodno, Tomaszów, Mazowiecki, Chełm, and Brześć. And finally, I think we have, so I'm going to just show very quickly. I know the time is running. I want to show you at least a picture of from the book itself of the repertoire. I'm going to get there. I may not be able, it looks like my screen. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. So I just want everyone to see in the book. Can you see it now? Yes. So this gives you a sense. We have the pages of this book from the actual repertoire in the Lwów musical societies. And Sylvia goes through and analyzes their shift. She sees 3 different kinds of repertory choices: more assimilationist, more populist, and more Jewish nationalist towards the end of the 30s, reflecting, of course, the beginning of the constriction of Jewish life. And it gives you a sense of what was performed and who performed it. And I want to just say something that's very important, and I think Helena and I both feel this. So much of the music and so much of this creativity is unknown because of the Holden, because many of these creative artists, musicians, architects, visual artists, poets, literary prose writers, had no descendants. And therefore, we don't know what they did. And so our work was not commemorative in a nostalgic way, but it was to some degree of work of recovery. And nothing showed that better than the concert that Helena organized for our symposium. And I will let her now tell you more about the music in the book and also the music that is on our website and that we heard. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to try to go quickly to allow some time for us to have a conversation. So these are 2 programs that I put side by side from Sylwia Jakubczyk-Ślęczka's article. She mined the archives and newspapers available to her to understand how the Jewish Music Society functioned in today's city of Lviv, then Polish city, Lwów. And I put side by side these 2 concerts because they show really clearly the sort of shift that Nancy mentioned. So on the left, you have a concert from 1921 that is focused on a kind of central repertoire of Western art music with Brahms and Carl Maria von Weber, and then Richard Strauss. And then in the right column, you have a concert of Jewish music. And notice they even have different titles. These are not our titles. This is how they are referenced in the programming that Sylwia was able to access. And you will see that these are Jewish composers, creating art music on Jewish themes, drawing on folklore, drawing on Jewish history for subjects, for topics. So complete shift in what was being programmed. And one of the things that the shift like this demonstrates is how this particular group of Jewish music lovers saw themselves in the music through their interest, through what they wanted to hear. So in some ways, we also hear not just what musicians were doing, but also what audiences were interested in. And at the bottom, you will see that there are folk songs arranged by Jewish composers. This becomes increasingly important through the 20s and into the 30s. And here's a program already from 1922 of the first Congress of the delegates from Jewish music and choral societies from Galicia. So there were several cities that included Lwów and Kraków. And you will see that not only do you have Jewish folk songs arranged by Five Wishes, but also he gave a lecture on Jewish folk music. I am particularly fascinated in Five Wishes. As Nancy pointed out, I am interested in everything that is connected to Łódź. So I first encountered him as a musician active in Łódź. He actually worked in several cities throughout his career, and Łódź was an important stop for him. He conducted there the Hazomir choir, and conducted a very, very famous and much written about performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. That was a major event prepared the choir for that performance. It was a major event of national scale. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was performed very, very seldom because of the forces required. And then the last chapter of his life was in the Warsaw ghetto, where he also led a children's choir. So he's somebody that I have encountered in many different contexts, mostly as a director of choirs. And his first major job was a job in Lwów, and at the time, the city was not really interested very much in this kind of folkloristic music. So he didn't last very long there. That's when he moved to Łódź. But his was the first chapter in kind of shifting the interest that really originated with the Jewish Folk Society from St. Petersburg, and then moved into Vilnius and then into other cities in Poland. That was a musical manifestation of the search for kind of folkloristic Jewish identity that would be different from Polish identity, Polish folkloristic identity, from religious identity that would be connected to synagogue music. So I was thrilled to find an arrangement of a folk song by Five Wishes, because all of this reading, all of the documents that I encountered that came to me as historical records finally were translated into sound. And more recently, I actually found his picture also. So now there is a face for me to put together with the historical records and the sound. So here is a little bit of gorgeous, gorgeous arrangement of a song, sorry. let me take you to a website that we created in connection with the book that holds the music from a concert accompanying our workshop. So the first stage of our work was the workshop. And you can see that we are back to this beautiful image that we used on the cover of our book, because we found that image when we were preparing the concert and used it for the poster for the concert. You see the address of our website, but rather than showing you the slide, let me take you to the website. One second.
I'm going to interject for 1 second while you do that. I'm extremely proud of the concert, which Helena had everything to do with and I had little to do with, but it was the students of the Mason Gross School of the Arts, the Conservatory at Rutgers University, under the extraordinary baton of Pat Gardner. And it was with Pat's guidance that he and Helena worked very carefully on what was going to be sung and played. It was both instrumental and choral music. And the last piece you heard is a somewhat well-known song about a Zionist pioneer, a young woman who's going to Palestine. And we have it in both Hebrew and Yiddish. And she's saying to her mother, "I'm going." And her mother is saying, "But what will you do there? And with whom will you work?" And there's one very, how should I say, frisky lyric where her mother says, "Well, where are you going to sleep?" And she says, "I'm going to sleep in a wagon with 2 chalutzim. So don't worry about me, Mom."
Okay, I'm sorry for the fumbling, but we have many different windows open here to make sure that all the technology runs. So this is the website, and I took you right away to the tab with recordings, and you can see the range of the recordings of the compositions that were performed in the concert, because I think it's very fitting to close with this, because it really shows you the range of cultural engagement of Polish Jewish artists. So this is a composition that comes from the 1860s, that was written especially for the Progressive Synagogue in Warsaw. This is before the Tlomackie Synagogue was erected. So this is the predecessor, and Weiss was the musical director and the cantor for that synagogue. Birnbaum was active in Częstochowa and to some degree in Łódź as well. So you get liturgical music, but music perhaps different than what we typically associate with the cantorial sound. If you want to hear a little bit of that later on, and you have the time, I will play a little bit of what it sounded like. It's closer to the German choral synagogue tradition. The virtuoso tradition is represented by a piece by Paula Shalit, who was one of the most talented virtuosos of her time. Unfortunately, died very young. Couple of very modernist mazurkas, Alexander Tanzman's composition written just before he moved to Paris. Again, the language is very modernist. Here's an example from Polish popular music. So this is another composition by Andrzej Vlast. And Yiddish art song. This is art song in the tradition of the German Lied, but the text is Jewish themed and in the Yiddish language. Again, modernist composition, a trio written in the dodecaphonic language characteristic of Schoenberg. Koffler actually traveled to Vienna to learn about this particular style of music. And here are a couple of compositions, couple of arrangements that were written for Yiddish language choirs. Jewish choirs. That Hazomir that I mentioned in Poland, they were ensembles such as Hazomir, and many of them named Hazomir all over Poland in cities big and small. And this is, you can get a sense of some of that repertory through these arrangements. This amazing collection was published just on the eve of the war in 1939. And this kind of speaks again to what Nancy said earlier. They didn't know it's the eve of the war. They were going about putting on musical artistic projects that were important to them and that marked their everyday engagement with art and culture. So I think I will stop here so that we have a little time to talk if there are questions from the audience.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. I have to clear my throat again. There were a number of comments, and you're all invited to contribute comments and questions right now. Chaim Beliak earlier made a comment about the chorus, the school, the image that you presented in Buchach, and saying it's not a Agnon's Buchach. So to me, that kind of struck a chord, because the contrast between what we know of the romantic Buchach through Agnon and what you represented there speaks for a lot of what you've been focusing on here. I wonder if either of you would want to comment on that.
I just think, I think we all know we all walk through our days. We already have a filter when we walk out the door, right? And we sort of see what we want to see. And I'm not sure we can't not do that. But particularly because the Jewish life and life in general in Poland was cut short so mercilessly and so utterly destroyed. I mean, many of you know this. Who could even go to Buchach anymore? I mean, and now we're once again facing this. But even thinking about Warsaw, the great city of Warsaw, Warsaw was razed to the ground. So, and so we only then have this ex post facto source material that so many people read. And then think about Agnon, who is a genius. People also misread Agnon. He's a modernist writer. He's not an ethnographer. So when they read Agnon, and he's so steeped in rabbinic and Hebrew and biblical Hebrew, and he's such a master. I mean, there are no words to describe him, but he's not a reporter on the ground. So the Buchach of his life, he's not telling you about market day in Buchach, or if he is, he's imagining it for his own purposes. I think one of the better examples of this that is also probably familiar to many of our listeners is, when we say the word Kishinev, everyone says, oh, the Kishinev pogrom. I know all about the Kishinev pogrom in 1903 because what a poem. I mean, it tells you the power of literature, so I would never criticize that. But Bialik, some people know, Chaim Nachman Bialik wrote the very famous poem, Be'ila Hariga, in the city of slaughter, about the Kishinev pogrom. But he also did reportage on what actually happened in Kishinev, but that detailed reporting was buried. He never published it, and it was only discovered like 10, 15 years ago. So the same thing here. Buchach was a vital city with all kinds of things, bad boys, good girls. And I would say to all of you, if you've never seen the book, Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimlet, I know I'm going on here, but I can't help it. Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimlet's father was a young boy who left Opatuf when he was a kid. And then late in his life, he began to draw and paint his image of Opatuf. And he left in the good days, right, in the 20s. So what you see of his image of Opatuf is, prostitutes, the well, the chickens that are running around with their heads cut off when the butcher was about to slaughter them and then one escaped and was still flapping his wings. The heat of the day. It's called My Name is Mayor July. And it's a beautiful art book done by a daughter, homage to her father. But what's important about it is that it's everyday life, what we say, teglich, everyday life, the secularists, the Haredim, but whatever, not one static sepia toned view. And I think that, you know, the music alone that Helena put together is enough to show you the variety. Read the words. The program is in the book. It's on the website. The multiple languages, the musical influences. It just shows you Polish Jews, like Jews everywhere, were never siloed off from the cultures in which they lived. So, yeah. It's a big issue for us.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions. So what I'm going to suggest, Helena, you said there was one other piece that you would play if we would have the time. So why don't you line that up, and I'm just going to say a few final words, and then we'll end with the music, right? It'll be perfectly a perfect bookend. I want to thank everybody for coming. This was just a spectacular presentation, eye-opening for everyone. And we are grateful to you both, Nancy and Helena, for really spectacular presentation. Those of you who have been at library book talks before, we invite you to come back. Those who haven't, you see the kind of quality that we can offer. So when you get the notices, I encourage you to look at them carefully. We've got a very full schedule through this semester until May. And so if you enjoy this kind of presentation, I'm confident that you will thank yourself for coming back. So again, thank you so much. And please, Helena, go right ahead with the music.
So what I will do is I will actually play two brief excerpts so you can see some of the range of what is performed. This comes from a collection from the very end of the 19th century that was created for the Progressive Synagogue in Częstochowa by Abraham Beerbaum. And I want to give a shout out to the wonderful Pat Gardner, who just retired from Rutgers University, who at the time led the choir. He just did an amazing job, and his extraordinary openness to various repertories and desire to expose his students to as much cultural variety and historical range of music was really admirable, something we should all aspire to. I will jump ahead. You all know probably the text. I will stop it here and play another completely different excerpt, again from the same collection of song that Five Wishes' arrangement of Hernor Shane Maidala. This is an arrangement of Mendelssohn's chorus from Walpurgisnacht, and it is beautiful also how Broderson arranges it to suit Yiddish-speaking audiences, not just linguistically, but culturally, as he translates the text into Yiddish. So. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thanks for having us. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak about the book. It was truly a labor of love to work on it.
Well,
And I
that's
think a
evident.
good friend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.